So my name's Caleb Altmeyer, and I'm the founder of an organization called Helping Captives. And we help do prevention, intervention, and recovery services for women coming out of human trafficking. So I was raised in the most amazing family. So my mom is a quadriplegic, so I was raised by a woman in a wheelchair who can't walk, but is just the most amazing person, has the most amazing faith. And so that was my childhood. And then my father ran a homeless shelter. And so he was the men's director at a homeless shelter. So that was my childhood, was being in a family that was ministering to the most in need in our community, and seeing a mom that wasn't a victim, that wanted to raise us, wanted to learn how to she knew how to sew, she learned how to paint. I mean, she's just the most amazing person in the world. And then in my city, my family's pretty well known in the area for doing ministry, and so you're like a peak pastor's kid on steroids, and so you learn really quickly that you're in a glass box and people are watching you. Right. And at my school that I grew up in, I didn't feel like I could actually communicate what I was struggling with or if I was wrestling with my faith, so I just kind of internalized everything. And when I got to about 7th or 8th grade is when the enemy really started pointing out to me that my mom couldn't walk. And the enemy's really good, like what he did to Eve and Adam in the garden, right? You've got this entire garden and all this amazing stuff, and he gets you to focus on this one tree. There's one thing that you don't have. And so I'm focused on this one issue, that I can't run with my mom, I can't dance with my mom. And he's feeding me this: if God's good, why can't your mom walk, right? So I'm starting to wrestle with this. And so when school started, you go into the cafeteria, and it's that awkward time of like, I don't want to be alone, who am I going to sit with? And these girls said, hey, come over and sit with us. So I had a place to sit, but who I was sitting with and who the guys were that they were hanging out with were all the fighters and the pot smokers and all those kids. So that's kind of who I became and who I started hanging out with. And around that time, my dad went on a 40-day fast in the wilderness, so he just left, nothing but water and a tent, and just left to go spend time with the Lord. And he was believing that my mom would get healed. And so I'm kind of secretly, with my faith journey, still smoking pot, sneaking out, doing my thing, hanging out with this group of people, but I'm clinging to this hope that maybe my mom will get healed, because Dad's out there. Now he goes out for 40 days, God downloads to him to start a church, comes back, he's able to run down the mountain and do push-ups. I mean, it's a total miracle, but again, I can't see what God did. I'm just focused on that my mom doesn't get healed. And so he comes back, and I realize I'm gonna try and take care of myself. So at 16, I move out, and would occasionally come back and live with my parents when I'd fall on my face, and would live by their rules, and then I would not want to live by their rules anymore, and I'd go out. So for about 3 years there, I just sold pot and partied and dropped out of school. So that was my life before Christ. My parents got a plan to pray for me, and my mom somehow got a hold of some prayers, some books, met with some ladies, and she just took her prayer game to a different level and started declaring scriptures over me. And she would post all these scriptures over her television. So when she would want to watch TV, she would pray these scriptures over me. And she started just loving me instead of preaching to me. And so I started coming around more. So I was going to their house, and I got mad at my mom because she had all these Bible verses over the TV, and I think I wanted to watch LeBron James play a basketball game or something. And I get angry, I start cussing at her, and I'm like, I don't want to hear about God, I don't want to hear about Jesus. I'm literally just angry when I hear Jesus' name. And I go downstairs and I fall asleep, and when I'm asleep, all of a sudden I'm leaving my body. And I wake up and I'm in this dream, but it's so different than a normal dream. I can feel the wind, I can feel the water, I can feel everything. God comes and speaks to me in this dream audibly and calls me into ministry. And that's what changed my life. And so I wake up out of this dream, and I'm forever changed. And I'm just like, God's real. And I began my journey of reading my Bible again, listening to worship music. I've got demons leave me in the car when the worship music kicks on, and everything in me can't even hear Jesus' name. Jesus is just so powerful. That name is so powerful. These things just had to leave. So now I get filled with the Holy Spirit, and I'm just like, this is insane, and I'm in. Because when you're on fire, man, like when you find life, you got to let everybody know. So I go and I tell the counselor, the police officer at the school, and the cop like knows me from my past, and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, man, I got saved, I'm going to church. So they said, can you help us with all these other kids that are in our class that are struggling with drug addiction? So I go into the class, and every single person in there I had sold drugs to or done drugs with. And now I'm like, you need to come to church with me. And that was kind of what started my journey with getting into ministry. Still wrestling and still struggling. And that's where I got invited to a youth conference. And there was this guy named David Englehart that was a youth pastor. And I walk in, and this conference was called Love Encounter, right? So I almost didn't go because I'm like, I don't know if I want to go to this event called Love Encounter, you know what I mean? And this guy gets up and he speaks, and he's charismatic, and he can preach, and the dude can sing. He's just got everything going on for him. But he gets up there and he starts talking about the fact that God can speak to us, and he asks us to take some time and hear from God and write down some questions on what God's speaking to us. And he said, there's somebody out in the city that we believe, God wants to reach. And so we're going to ask God to give us clues on how to find this person. And I think it's weird. I'm just being honest with you. I'm like new to this, but I'm going, well, I've had crazy encounters with God. I know he's real. And this dude seems to believe that God can speak to you like that. And I've had these things, so let me try it. So I'm sitting there praying, and I get these weird things that come into my head, like Fifth Street, pizza parlor, a cigarette, a hat with a yellow like swoosh on it, and a bright yellow sweatshirt. And then those are these clues that we're asking the Lord for, and I'm like, okay, this is different. And then the question on the paper said, is there anything God wants to say to this guy? So I asked the Lord, and I'm just like, hey God, all right, if I meet this person, what do you want to say to him? And it just said, he knows me, he's just forgotten how much I care about him. And so we go out on the street. David sends us all out with our clues or whatever. And I think it's weird, and I'm going around and I don't see any of these clues, and I'm thinking, man, these guys are nuts. I'm gonna dip back to the church. So I leave the whole group, and I was like, start walking back to the church, and I'm walking back and I see 3rd Street, and my heart starts racing because one of the things was 5th Street. And I'm like, man, is there a 5th Street in this city? So I go up and I see 4th Street, and my heart starts racing, and I start walking up to 5th Street. And as I'm walking up to 5th Street, there's a pizza parlor. And I'm like, no way. So I get up to 5th Street, and I get on the corner, and I'm looking for somebody, right? And there's nobody there. So I'm thinking, whew, like, okay, I could go back to the church. So I take a left, and I walk past the pizza parlor, and I look behind the pizza parlor, and there's a dude smoking a cigarette. And he's got a black hat with a yellow Nike symbol on it. Wow. So every single one of the clues except for this bright yellow sweatshirt is on there. But it was enough for me. So I see him, and I'm like staring at him awkwardly because I'm in shock, and he's looking at me. And so now you have to have a conversation because you're just staring at each other. And I just walk up to him, I'm like, man, I don't know how to explain this to you, but like here. And I just hand him the paper, and I'm like, I feel like God really wants you to know how much he loves you. He starts breaking down because he goes, this is me. And all of a sudden, now as we're talking, I'm praying with him. No joke, there's a knock on the door, and his little kid walks out with a bright yellow sweatshirt. So I'm just like, from then on, I'm all in. I'm like, this is a cheat code to life. All I have to do is spend time with God and learn how to hear God's voice, and then be crazy enough to obey him, and I'm gonna be okay. I just felt like the Lord said, you can start a small group. I started that small group with a group of young boys that didn't really have healthy homes. And that grew and grew and grew. And all of a sudden I got 30 kids coming to my parents' house every day. And they're like, you got to figure something out. So at 22, I started a nonprofit. We wanted to help reach our city with the gospel. And we started doing outreaches, started food bank, food distribution, young adult ministry, just anything and everything you could do to reach your city. And then what really changed for us was a lady came to my dad's church, and she came up to him at the end of the service, and she started telling him her story that she had been trafficked by her parents since the age of 6. But the kicker is that girl that came up and talked to my dad, she was my babysitter. And so we had no idea that this young girl that was our neighbor that would come over and watch us, and my mom was still there, she would watch her with us, but she says, the reason I would come over all the time is you were the only safe family that I knew. And that broke my dad's heart. And then he tells me about it, so I go meet with her, and she begins to tell me her story of just how she was trafficked and how her parents sold her. And actually her parents were into witchcraft, and so they would sell her as like rituals and stuff like that. She had seen so much stuff, and at first it was really hard for me to believe, to be honest, because it was just so dark. And I remember going back to my youth center with my staff, and I'm telling them this story of what I'm processing, and one of the ladies starts crying. It's my coworker. She has a similar story. She had been trafficked. So she opens up and says, this is why every time your dad comes over to see you at the office, I always walk into the other room. Because my dad worked at a prison and would sell me to his prison guard buddies. And your dad reminds me of someone that would work at the jail. And so she was still getting triggered by that. And that's when it became real to me, because my father came to the office one day after she had opened up, and she realized she knew he was safe, but it took her 10 minutes to walk from that door to him. Like if he was me, you're talking 10, 15 feet. It took her 10 minutes to walk to him to get a hug, because she was crying and trembling in fear, because she never had a father that loved her and gave her, because her dad would sell her. And so that like 15-foot walk, I just remember watching this girl going to a man of safety and just trembling in fear and just shaking. And that's what changed everything for me. I realized I'm like, there's people in our society that have come out of this that are still dealing with so much trauma, and they need love and they need support and they need help. So my father and I talked after that, and that's when we opened up the first safe house to help women coming out of trafficking. And we thought, we'll just have a home and we'll put some house parents in there, and we might help 2 to 3 women. That's all we were thinking. We just were like, this will be a part of the organization. We opened it up and we had 21 women go through our house in 9 months. It changed everything. It changed our whole life. And now we're known as Helping Captives. All we focus on is just being the best anti-trafficking organization we possibly can. We've used all our resources now to fight trafficking. We opened up an education center. We do prevention and education training, really just educating the community and kids on what trafficking is so they don't get trafficked. And then we provide recovery services, 30 to 90 days of recovery, free of charge, food, housing, counseling, case management, everything to help women get stable, and then we get them into long-term care. What we're wanting to expand in right now is that immediate care. Is as soon as somebody comes to us, we want to have a place that's like an emergency center for 3 days to 7 days for them to really get clean and get stable before we move them into our 90-day program. And so that's where we're at today. And we were sitting down praying about, what would be the perfect facility? What would be the perfect situation for us? We would want to have a place that you can do 24-hour drop-off, that would be on a bus line, that would be a very secure location, and that everybody in the community that we work with would know where that location is. And after we got done with our strategic plan, about 2 days after we had finalized that, I get an email from somebody telling me that our local strip club of 40 years had closed down and it was for sale. And I remember him saying, I think this would be a cool ministry center. He has no idea that we're having a strategic plan meeting. We're looking for a place to do outpatient, have headquarters, and an emergency drop-off location. I'm sitting there going, at first, there's no way. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. It seems like a big project. And I kind of text him back and say, hey, good luck with that. I'm praying for you. And then about half an hour later, I'm just sitting there and I can't sleep. I'm watching a movie with my wife, and I'm like, I know I'm not going to be able to sleep that night. And I'm just processing all this. And I'm going, man, God, maybe you're crazy enough that you would turn a building that actually exploited women and objectified them, made a living off of objectifying women, and turned that facility into a place that would help heal exploited women. And I'm just sitting there going, I want to look into this. I called a realtor the next day. The building was already under contract. Somebody else wanted it. And he said, I love what you guys are doing, though. I'm going to sneak you in from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, my anti-trafficking director randomly shows up to my office, and so does a survivor of trafficking. And I'm sitting there talking to them, and I go, hey, do you guys want to come look at this building with me? So we go down and we go into this building, and it's all black and red. But it's on a bus line. It's been open late into the night for the last 40 years, so no one's gonna care if there's a car that shows up at 3 or 4 in the morning. It's super secure. There's no windows. It used to be a movie theater and then was turned into a club. So it's just this perfect secure building. Everybody in the underground, or everybody in our community that's coming out of the life, knows where this building is located. And we walk through the building, and there's nude photos of women, and the stages, and just you could feel this heaviness in this building. But the anti-trafficking director and the survivor are just so excited. And the survivor was so pumped, and she goes, this is what God does to us. He takes us from a place that's dark and a place of my past, and I used to work here, and like, how cool would it be that we could remodel it and give it a new purpose and a new future? And I'm sitting here just thinking, this is God. This is awesome. He calls me a couple weeks later and says, hey, the thing fell through. So I'm like, well, I'm going to make an offer at this. And we started that process, and all of a sudden our city council calls me, and they had voted to put $1 million, which the building was $1.2 million, and we had negotiated around that $900,000 to $930,000 range. And they had voted to put $1 million into an account to fight human trafficking. And then they had voted to have us as an organization come in and present for that money. So I get a phone call, and they say, hey, you've been voted as Helping Captives to come in and present for this money. We're the only organization in Spokane Valley that is doing this, that has a business license in Spokane Valley. So I'm thinking, well, this must be where I'm going to get the money. This is God. So a few days before I'm supposed to present, however, they sit me down and they have a conversation with me, and they give me a request for proposal. And on the front of the paper, it's got the different things that you need to have to qualify for the grant. We hit every single one of them, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. We flip the paper over, on the back side it has 3 terms. And the first term is you must, not use any of this money for something that we don't agree upon. So that's a no-brainer. The second one is they want to put a 15-year restriction on our deed if we ask for this money to buy a building. That's a hard sell for us to have the government putting a restriction on our building, especially as a religious organization and people that believe in Christ. But the third restriction said if we take any of this money, that it would have to be used for secular use only. And so I started asking some clarifying questions, and they basically told me if we buy the building with this money, then everything that must be done in that building must be secular. So instead of me going at the night I'm supposed to present for the $1 million, I've got to go into city council, tell them thank you for the opportunity, but there's just no amount of money in the world that you could give me to take Christ out of our programming. And so now we're actually out trying to raise the money. We've raised $250,000. We got about $650K left, and we're trying to raise the money to be able to buy this building outright so that we can remodel this facility into a headquarters and outpatient facility and a drop-off location so that we can do emergency services. But we're believing that our community and people in our country will actually help us get this funding to fight human trafficking so that we can do what's necessary without a ton of restriction, and we can actually bring Christ into our recovery services, because that's what's so important. We have to have Christ in our recovery. We're so much more than just sexual beings. God has got so much more plans for us, and He can change a life. He can redeem somebody after they've been groomed and raped and trafficked. If you want to follow us, get involved, donate, go to helpingcaptives.org If you want to continue following the process or follow me, you can go to Instagram and type in Caleb Altmeyer and just follow the process of what we're going to be up to. Thanks.